the miraculous and the mysterious. We've seen so far in chapter 1 that Daniel and his friends were deported over into Babylon. At that particular time, whenever the king tried to give them the choicest of food off his table and the wine to drink, Daniel and his friends asked for permission to not break the law of God, but rather to do what they're supposed to do, to eat what they were supposed to eat. And God blessed them to make them healthier than any of the others, gave them wisdom and insight and vision. As we begin in chapter 2, we see an experience that happens in the life of King Nebuchadnezzar. Listen to what it says in Daniel chapter 2, verse 1. Now in the second year of the reign of Nebuchadnezzar, Nebuchadnezzar had dreams, and his spirit was troubled, and his sleep left him. Then the king gave orders to call the magicians, the conjurers, the sorcerers, and the Chaldeans to tell the king his dreams. So they came in and stood before the king. And the king said to them, I had a dream, and my spirit is anxious to understand the dream. Then the Chaldeans spoke to the king in Aramaic, saying, O king, live forever. Tell the dream to your servants, and we will declare its interpretation. Let's stop there for just a minute and see what we see regarding Nebuchadnezzar. First of all, you have to remember that Nebuchadnezzar is the most powerful king on the face of the earth at this time. As far as being a world conqueror, he was the world conqueror. He ruled all of the known world at that particular time. He had great power, great position, great wealth. He had everything that you possibly could imagine. But you notice something? That even in the midst of all of that great wealth and blessings that he has an anxiety and a troubling that causes him to have a sleepless night. He has an anxiety and a troubling because he dreams a dream. And it says he dreams dreams because obviously he dreams this same dream over and over again. And night after night he's dreaming that dream, and he cannot understand the dream. He does not know the interpretation, but it makes him very troubled within his spirit, very anxious in his heart, and he finds himself having sleepless nights. Now, if you don't get another thing out of this message, you ought to write this down in your notes. It's this: just because you have great position, great power, and great wealth, it does not mean that you have peaceful sleep. You got that? Right? That'll be worth you having, okay? Because it does not guarantee that you will have peaceful sleep. I know most people think that if you don't have great wealth, you say, I tell you what, if I were rich, I would sleep like a baby. If I were rich, everything would be great. And everything would be wonderful. If I had that right position, that right power, everything would be great. There is no guarantee of peaceful sleep when you have those positions, all right? The only way that you find that you have peaceful sleep is not based on the wealth that you have or the power you have, but it's the relationship you have with a living God and the God of peace who imparts that peace to you. See, if you don't have it, people are anxious about wanting to get it. And when you do have it, you're anxious about losing it. And that's exactly where Nebuchadnezzar was. Whenever he sees this dream and he sees the statue that we'll talk about next week and the interpretation of that dream, everything he saw he knew was something that was a message to him, and he knew it had to be something about his kingdom, and his fear was that he was going to lose it. That he was going to lose it. So you don't necessarily have peace when you have all of those things that you think bring peace. It's God who gives that peace. Well, he has this dream or these dreams over and over again. And whenever he has these dreams, he does the only thing that that pagan king knows that he can do to try to find the answer. And that is he calls in what are his wise men. He calls in his wise men among the Babylonians to help him to interpret that dream and to know what is happening. He has a sense that some kind of message is specifically for him. So he calls in those wise men. They're listed there in verse 2 and also expanded a little bit later whenever Daniel is talking to the king. But he says this in regard to the wise men, who they are. And the king gave orders to call in the magicians, the conjurers, the sorcerers, and the Chaldeans to tell the king his dreams. Over in verse 27 of the same chapter, when Daniel begins to talk to the king, he says, and the king has inquired neither wise men, conjurers, magicians, or diviners are able to declare it to the king. So there's actually 5 groups of these wise men that he calls to help him to understand and to interpret that dream. None of those are able to help. Just as, let me tell you something, just as none of those are able to help today, okay? They're not just existing in that day. These people still exist today. And people, even Christian people, sometimes want to depend on these wise men and these conjurers to tell them what's going to happen in the future, tell them what the meaning of life is and give direction. Well, I'm here to tell you, they're not able to help. And none of those can. Look at those 5. They're listed in verse 2. It says, the conjurers. You know, the conjurers are first the magicians. The magicians, you know who the magicians were? They were the ones who used incantation as they prayed to these idol gods, in order to give them an understanding and a meaning, and for God to reveal Himself about the future. If you remember on the Mount Carmel, you remember Mount Carmel experience? Well, Elijah's up there on Mount Carmel, and the Baal prophets were there, and the Baal prophets came, and he said, we'll have a competition, and what we'll do is we'll call on our God, and the God who answers by fire is the real God. You remember those Baal prophets? They go and they begin to cry out to their gods through incantations, asking God, their idol God, to work and to show Himself strong and to reveal by fire. They even begin to cut themselves to show their sincerity. And the whole time Elijah was making fun of you, remember? Hey, what happened to your God? Maybe he's on vacation. Maybe he left. Why is he making fun of him? Because there are no gods. And all those magicians who are praying to those idol gods and trying to find out meaning from those idol gods and using all these incantations are not going to be any help at all to the king, because they serve no God. They serve no God. There is no God except God alone. You understand that? And when the message, which he's getting this message from the real God, when the real God's the one who gives the message, I'll assure you, no wise men of Babylon or wise men of this world who don't know God are ever going to be able to interpret it. You understand that? That which God gives, only God and God's people will understand. It's not going to be the magicians. Well, the magicians were one of those who used the incantations. It says the conjurers. The conjurers were those who actually worshiped demons. They believed in the demonic spirits, and there are demonic spirits, and they showed loyalty towards the demonic spirits, and they asked the demons to be the ones who would help them to see into the future or to give an interpretation. They specifically were worshiping demons. Well, just as the magicians and all their incantations and their false gods not going to give an answer, I'll assure you this, the demons don't know anything about what God has revealed to Nebuchadnezzar, and they don't have any hope of any help for him. Not only is it the conjurers, it says also the sorcerers. The sorcerers, these were those who felt like in order to find out the things of God, you had to get into a deep sleep, a deep concentration. And they would actually use drugs. It would be a drug-induced time whenever they would be falling into the hands of an evil spirit who would help them to know deep and dark things that no one else would know except those deeper and darker spirits. And they would use drugs, and through the drug use and through its enhanced state, they're supposed to know the things of God. Well, I'm here to tell you, they don't know the things of the future, and they can't help Nebuchadnezzar a bit. And then it says, and then there are the Chaldeans. Well, the Chaldeans, first of all the Babylonians were known as Chaldeans. But there was a specific group called the Chaldeans. The Chaldeans were actually a group who had school, and their school was to study about the sciences and all kinds of things, like geology and even astronomy. The Chaldeans in their initial states, they created a lot of things. They even established the 365 and 1/4 day for a year. Did you know that? But what happened, the longer they went along, they left science and they began to get mystical things. And the primary thing that they began to function on was not astronomy, but astrology. You know the difference in astronomy and astrology, don't you? Astronomy says the stars are up there and we want to see how they are. Astrology says that the way those stars are placed and where they are, how you're born, and what star you're born under, and what zodiac sign is going to determine your future in your direction. And so they study the stars, the word of the stars. Well, I'm here to tell you, the word of the stars is not going to reveal what God knows. It's going to be the God who created those stars who will reveal what God knows. You understand that? And people still do that today. I know some of you, I'm not even going to look. Some of you probably want to read your horoscope every day. Well, bless your heart. I hope those stars tell you something. They're not going to tell you anything. I would not waste my time 1 minute. Well, it's just funny to me. It's just playing around. Listen, take that same time where you read your horoscope and read the Bible. You'll be blessed, all right? You'll get a word from God instead of the word of stars. I don't want God to ever think that I'm listening to the word of His stars versus Him, all right? And I know you think, well, you know, people are, today, this stuff's not today. Oh, yes, it is. It's everywhere. Astrology is everywhere. And all kinds of idol worship is everywhere. And all kind of palm readers. You see the palm readers out there who are trying to tell the future what's going to happen to you in regard to that. And the diviners. See, the fifth of that group were the diviners. He listed that in verse 27. And he says, none of those diviners can find and to know and to interpret this for you, Nebuchadnezzar. Well, who were the diviners? Diviners were ones who specifically wanted to know and to find out about the future. And they would try to look and to find out the future and to know things by different sources. One of those things they would do is they'd pick up sticks or they would pick up arrows and they'd throw them up in the air and let them fall on the ground. And then the way they fell on the ground, that was an interpretation. They would interpret how the future was going to be. Well, don't that bless you, you know? You ever heard of the divining rod? You ever heard of a divining rod? That's where it comes from, this aspect of that stick going to determine those things about. Now, I know somebody, well, that divining rod works with water. Don't come talk to me about that. That's just where the word came from, all right? The diviners, they would cut animals open and look at their livers to foresee the future. Wouldn't you like that job? Boy, what do you see in that liver? They'd look in the water to try. Everything was about seeing the future, telling the future, knowing the future. And all Nebuchadnezzar had at his disposal, at least all he thinks he has at his disposal, are those wise men. And when I say wise men, I put parentheses or quotations over wise, all right? Those wise men is all he had to help him to understand his dream. And they're going to find out, he's going to find out they're no help. Because why? Because he is going to require of something. He's going to make a very unusual request. Look at the unusual request. Look at there. In verse 4, they said, "Oh, king, just tell us what that dream is, and we'll declare the interpretation." Listen to verse 5. The king answered and said to the Chaldeans, "The command from me is firm. If you do not make known to me the dream and its interpretation, you will be torn limb from limb, and your houses will be made a rubbish heap. But if you declare the dream and its interpretation, you will receive from me gifts and a reward and great honor. Therefore, declare to me the dream and its interpretation." Look what it says in verse 7. They answered a second time and said, "Let the king tell the dream to his servants, and we will declare the interpretation." Verse 8, the king answered and said, "I know for certain that you are bargaining for time, inasmuch as you've seen that the command from me is firm, that if you do not make known the dream to me, there is only one decree for you. For you have agreed together to speak lying and corrupt words before me until the situation is changed. Therefore, tell me the dream, that I may know that you can declare to me its interpretation." Do you hear his unusual request? He brought them in and said, "Okay, I need your help." They puffed up and said, "Okay, king, just tell us the dream, and we'll tell you the interpretation." He said, "That's not the way it's going to work. What you're going to have to do, you're going to have to first tell me the dream, and then tell me the interpretation." Now, I know some people think, well, he didn't remember the dream. I don't think it's a matter that he didn't remember the dream. I think he knew the dream. He had dreamed it quite a number of times. He knew the dream well enough that it troubled him. Here's what he was doing. He didn't trust those wise men. Good, smart thing. I wouldn't trust them either. He said, "There's no way. I know what if I told you the dream, in order to save your neck, you'll get together and y'all talk about what the interpretation is, and you'll come back and tell me the interpretation. You'll all agree together, and that's what's supposed to be." He says, "No, that's not the way it's going to work this time. This is the way it's going to work. If you're really wise men and you really know something, then you ought to know the dream. If you don't know the dream, how could I ever know that you know the interpretation? So what you're going to do, first of all, is you're going to tell me the dream, and then after the dream, you can tell me the interpretation. And if you can't do that, then here's the punishment. I'm just going to tear you from limb to limb." I don't think he had mercy as one of his spiritual gifts, do you think? I'm just going to tear you from limb to limb, and your house will be rubbish. You know what that means? Not only am I going to kill you, I'm going to destroy your whole family. I'm going to kill you, destroy your whole family. But wait a minute. There's a good side. Flip side is that if you do tell me the dream, I will give you great rewards, great gifts, and I will give you a position of honor. I'll do one of those two things. Tear your limbs off, destroy your family, or give you great honor and gifts. And all you have to do is tell me the dream, tell me the interpretation. Wow. Different situation, different circumstance. I wonder who those writers of the horoscope would be if you said, okay, you're going to either tell me the whole truth and you're going to interpret it exactly right, or we're going to tear you from limb to limb. I wonder about those people who have on the back of their truck, palm reader. Stop here. Y'all been stopping by there? I'm going to look for your car. Palm reader. I wonder what you did if you said, well, you tell me something that comes true, I'm going to come shoot you. Let's shoot you right there. I wonder what they would do if they knew it cost them their life, if their interpretation was wrong. That's exactly what happened. And it wasn't something that, well, it might have, it might not. He's king. Remember, he's all powerful. All he has to do is say, you're dead, you're dead. It's done. And they knew that. They have a dilemma. They have difficulty. They have a situation. And they reach a point where they are in a desperate time and they're asking for mercy. You hear me now? You got to get this in your mind. Here are these wise men who know so many things and going to help the king rule. These wise men who can go to idols and find the message, can throw up sticks and find the message, can use drugs and find the message, can look at the stars and find the message. All these for all this time going to find the message until it's going to cost them their life. Look what happens in verse number 10. The Chaldeans answered the king and said, you need to underline this, there is not a man on earth who could declare the matter for the king. You ought to underline that. Hear what it says. There is not a man on earth who declare the matter for the king, inasmuch as no great king or ruler has ever asked anything like this of any magician, conjurer, or Chaldean. Nobody can do that. No man on earth can do that. That's never been asked of. Well, their problem is they don't know there is a man on earth who's about to do that. There is a man on earth, whenever they speak those words, who is going to be able to do exactly what they said could not happen. But do you know the difference in that man? Is he's not reading stars, and he's not using drugs, and he's not trying to divine anything. He has a relationship with the living God, the God of heaven. That's the difference. That's the difference. Look at they go on, verse 11. Moreover, the thing which the king demands is difficult. I love that. Hey, king, this is difficult. This is hard. You ought to write in the footnote of your Bible, not for God. That which is difficult for man is not hard for God. He goes on, listen to what he says. This thing that you're demanding is difficult, and there's no one else who could declare to the king except God's. To be able to do what you're saying, the person would have to be a God. Getting close. The only problem is they got a little G there and got an S on the end of it. That's their problem, right? Only gods can do this. No, the reality of only the God could reveal this. Here's where he messes up, though. Listen to what his statement is at the end of that. Whose dwelling place is not with mortal flesh. In other words, these gods don't dwell down here. These gods aren't down here who can tell you this thing. They don't dwell with us. They're not with mortal flesh. That's where you're wrong. See, what Nebuchadnezzar is going to find out, and what God wants to reveal to us through the book of Daniel is this, is that God is not in heaven up there on the throne alone, where there's nothing going to happen. He doesn't know anything that's happening in the world. You know where God is? He's right here. He's right here in this earth. He's right here around human flesh. He's right here giving dreams, and He'll interpret dreams, and He'll change times and epochs and kings. He'll do whatever He wants to do. Our God is not way off. Our God's right here. But they didn't know that. They didn't see that. Well, what was the response of Nebuchadnezzar? He wasn't a very patient man. Look what it says in verse 12. Because of this, the king became indignant and very fierce and gave orders to destroy all the wise men of Babylon. He just sent the order, just kill everyone, just get rid of every one of them. We don't need a one of them. Look what happens, 13. So the decree went forth that the wise men should be slain, and they looked for Daniel and his friends to kill them. Now here's an interesting thing. Daniel hasn't been in, he's one of the wise men, and he's one of those who is a part of that group as far as in that leadership of the nation. He's not one who's necessarily a Chaldean, a conjurer, anything else, but he was still included with the wise men. Daniel hasn't been asked. Daniel hasn't been a part of the interpretation. He hasn't been summoned at all. But they're going to kill Daniel and his 3 friends because he's a part of that group and because the wise men have all been decreed that they would be killed. Look what happens then in verse 14. Then Daniel replied with discretion and discernment to Arioch, the captain of the king's bodyguard, who had gone forth to slay all the wise men of Babylon. He answered and said to Arioch, the king's commander, for what reason is the decree from the king so urgent? Then Arioch informed Daniel about the matter. So Daniel went in and requested of the king that he would give him time in order that he might declare the interpretation to the king. Look what happens next. Then Daniel went to his house and informed his 3 friends, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, about the matter, in order that they might request compassion from the God of heaven concerning this mystery, so that Daniel and his friends might not be destroyed with the rest of the wise men of Babylon. Then the mystery was revealed to Daniel in a night vision. Then Daniel blessed the God of heaven. Now, I think an interesting thing is the contrast between Nebuchadnezzar and Daniel. Remember, Nebuchadnezzar is a man of great power and position and wealth, and he has a sleepless night. You know that? Where Daniel's over here with the threat of his life being destroyed because he's a part of that group who can't interpret anything. But he lies down and has a peaceful night of rest when God reveals the vision. What does Daniel do whenever he is confronted by this? Here are 4 statements I think are good statements that you need to write down about how Daniel handled this situation with Nebuchadnezzar and what he's going to do before God. First of all, when he found about it, he asked the king's permission to get the interpretation. He asked his friends to pray. He sleeps with peace in his heart, and he woke up with praise on his lips. That's a pretty good way to handle things. You hear that? He asked for permission to have time to interpret. He asked his friends to pray for him. He goes to sleep with peace in his heart. Peace in his heart. And then he wakes up with praise on his lips for Almighty God. Now, a couple things that you need to put footnotes in there. What do you do when things are hard? Take his advice. Pray. Don't only pray, ask your friends to pray. Do you have praying friends? You need praying friends. Did you know that? Find you some praying friends. Matter of fact, if you want to be a real good friend to somebody, you want a real good friend, one of the things you ought to ask them, do you pray? Do you pray? Because you don't understand. With me, I need praying friends. I need somebody who's going to pray for me and help me. And I need somebody to pray. You need to have friends who pray for you. He had those friends. Ask God for compassion. Ask God for mercy. Ask God to give that interpretation. It's their lives as well, but Daniel was the one. And whenever they prayed, he went to bed that night. He didn't wake up. He wasn't anxious. But in the night, he received the night vision. In the night, he got the answer, the interpretation to that. And the first thing he thinks about when he wakes up that morning is not like Nebuchadnezzar when he was anxious and troubled and wanting to know. The first thing is he begins to praise God. That's pretty good sleep when the first thing you think about in the morning is praise God. Amen? That's a pretty good way to sleep. And he does. And notice how he praises God. Listen to what he says, verse 20. Daniel answered and said, let the name of God be blessed forever and ever. For, this is very important, for wisdom and power belong to him. What was he needing? He needed wisdom, didn't he? He needed the wisdom to be able to see these things. For wisdom and power belong to him. And it is he who changes times and epochs, and he removes kings and establishes kings. Here again, he gives wisdom to wise men and knowledge to men of understanding. It is He who reveals the profound and hidden things. He knows what is in the darkness, and the light dwells with Him. Well, that's like Psalm 139. Isn't that great? There is no darkness with God. All it is light. He sees everything. Then he goes on and it says, in verse 13, he personalizes what he had said about God. Remember he said that God was God who for wisdom and power belongs to God. Listen what he says in 13. To Thee, O God of my fathers, I give thanks and praise, for Thou hast given me wisdom and power. You see that? He said, you're a God of wisdom and power. Then he said, you're a God who gives wisdom to wise men and understanding to those men, or knowledge to those men who have understanding. Then he personalizes, he says, and God, you did that for me. You gave me wisdom. Now that might not mean something to you, but it means something to me. It's one thing for me to state the attributes of God. There's no question about the attributes of God. But the big thing is that those attributes of God's actually play in my life. So one thing for him to be a God of wisdom is another thing for him to give me wisdom. And Daniel said, you did that for me. Notice what else he says. Even now thou hast made me known what was requested of thee, for thou hast made known to us the king's matter. When he said this, he says, you revealed the profound in verse 22 and the hidden things. He knows what's in the darkness and the light dwells in. It's a statement about God. But you know what he says personally about God? And those things that you reveal, you've made that known to me, what I requested. This matter with the king, you've let me know what was happening and the dream and the interpretation of the king. God, you are a great God. You've answered my prayer. And the other thing he said about God that will apply at the end of this in verse 21, that you have changed the times and epochs and removed kings and established kings. Because when he's going to interpret that statue and that dream, it's all about kings and kingdoms and who's going to be the king and who's going to replace that king and who's going to replace this king. Covering hundreds of years, God's going to reveal all of those 4 kingdoms, 5 kingdoms when you talk about the heavenly messianic kingdom in a statue. And he says, through it all, you reveal that you're in charge. Not Nebuchadnezzar. Not Nebuchadnezzar. You are in charge. Listen, he praises his God. Then notice what happens in verse 24. Therefore, Daniel went into Arioch, whom the king had appointed to destroy all the wise men of Babylon. He went and said, do not destroy the wise men of Babylon. Take me into the king's presence, and I will declare the interpretation of the king. Look what happens in 25. Human nature is so much like this, isn't it? Listen. Then Arioch hurriedly brought Daniel into the king's presence and spoke to him as follows. I have found a man. Oh, really? I have found a man among the exiles from Judah who can make the interpretation known to the king. That was not true. Did he find Daniel? Go back and read it. Daniel found him, right? Daniel found him and said, hey, don't kill anybody right now. So now he gets the interpreter and said, hey, don't kill anybody because God's giving me the answer. Hey, come on in here. I want to introduce you to the king. Hey, king. You remember all that gifts and wealth and rewards you given? I got somebody I want to introduce you to. I found him. I found him. Isn't that like human nature? Oh, don't act so holy to me. Yes, it is. He said, I want to introduce this guy who can really tell you, interpret this dream for you. Now, notice what Daniel does. Man, I'm telling you, if you have I don't know who in the Bible you'd like to be like. You know, you have, of course, Jesus. Everybody wants to be like Jesus. But if you can't be like Jesus, Daniel's a good character to be like. I mean, I don't know what you think cool is and, you know, and how you move. This guy is cool in how he does things. I know cool might not be a good word, but whatever that word is that fits today for you, that's who he is, okay? That's who he is. Listen to what he does. There in verse 26, the king answered and said to Daniel, whose name was Belshazzar, are you able to make known to me the dream which I have seen and its interpretation? Listen to Daniel. Daniel answered before the king and said, as for the mystery about which the king has inquired, neither wise man, conjurer, magician, nor diviner are able to declare it to the king. You hear what he just said? Hey, what the Chaldean said is exactly right. There is no man who has the ability to do that in themselves. No magician, no conjurer, no wise man has the power to do that himself. He's sitting here knowing the dream and knowing the interpretation. He could have said, nobody can do it but Me. I'm the only one. He didn't say, no man has the power to do it. Just like the Chaldeans said, no man has the power. But notice what he says. You ought to underline verse 28. What a great statement. However, there is a God in heaven. That is a great statement. However, there is a God in heaven. Whether you know that or not, that's a good answer to a lot of dilemmas in your life. When you face a dilemma in your life and you don't know what to do about it, and you don't know where it's headed, all you have to do is say, however, there's a God in heaven. That is a great, great statement. He says, no man can do it. However, there is a God in heaven. What? Who reveals mysteries, and he has made known to the king Nebuchadnezzar what will take place in the latter days. He's revealed to you what's going to happen in these latter days of human history. This was your dream and the visions in your mind while you were on your bed. As for you, O king, while you were on your bed, your thoughts turned to what would take place in the future. And he who reveals mysteries has made known to you what will take place. Isn't it interesting? The old pagan king is going to be the one who dreamed the dream that God's going to reveal the events of human history. He goes on and says, but as for me, this mystery has not been revealed to me for any wisdom residing in me more than in any other living man, but for the purpose of making the interpretation known to the king, and that you may understand the thoughts of your mind. Hear what he said? Hey, don't look to me, king. I'm not smarter than any other man. But it's that God of heaven who revealed to you the end time, and who is now giving to me the opportunity to interpret that for you, so that you might grab hold of, and so that all in the future will know that there is a God in heaven, and that He is in charge. He is in charge. He doesn't blow Himself up. He doesn't want to get any accolades at all. All He wants to do is be a faithful servant of God. And whether you know it or not, there are 10 lessons in there. 10 lessons in that story about what and how we ought to live, and how we ought to face things, and what things we ought not look to, and what things we ought not be planning on, and places we go, and things we act like, and how to respond. I'm here to tell you, Daniel is an example to follow. And if you want to be one who sleeps with peace and wakes with praise, just follow his example. Now, next week, we'll get to that dream.